Okay. I really hope the camera is actually focusing because when I tested my framing earlier, it was a little weird, so we're gonna cross our fingers on this one. Welcome back. Today I have a new video for you, and it is my January wrap-up. So I'm going to be talking through all the books that I read this month, or technically all of the books that I finished this month, because there are some in here that I started in like December, November, and then I got a bunch more free time this month and I finished them then. So yeah, this month I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books, but probably more like 7 because one of them is very short. It's like 106 pages. So yeah, that's what I read this month. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the first book I read this month was Gender Outlaw: On Men, Women, and the Rest of Us. It's by Kate Bornstein. This was really interesting to me. I've read like more like queer and trans like theory and nonfiction that's like more recent, and it was interesting to see how this differed from those books, because this was published in 1994. The Washington Blade called it the first book of gender theory written by a transgendered person. So it's interesting to read something like this when like knowing something about kind of current trans discourse and like what was focused on in the 90s versus now. She was assigned male at birth, and she talks a lot about like kind of the nitty-gritty aspects of her transition, like surgery, but then she also gets into a lot of interesting stuff around like gender theory and like gender as a construct, and her own kind of thinking, how she kind of moved away from like a binary model into something that's much more complex. So yeah, I really like this. I recommend it to anyone who's interested in reading about those sorts of things. It's definitely like, it has the mark of the 90s. Like it's not written like we would expect it to be written now, but I think that makes for something really interesting, and that makes for something that can be compared really well with more recent trans writing. So yeah. The next book I finished was Bridge of Clay by Markus Zusak. It is like monstrous. It's like 500 something pages. So I started this actually back in November, I want to say, or maybe even before that, and was like kind of dipping in and out of it for a while there. I think this one takes like a lot of time to get into. The writing is initially like very kind of bare and lyrical, and it's one of those books where you're not really given all the pieces right off the bat. It switches around a lot in terms of time, and it's very non-linear, so it's very satisfying when everything starts to come together, but until you see those threads emerging, it can be a little bit tough to get into. But I did actually end up really liking it. It was interesting because initially I thought, well, like this is okay. I feel like in the first 250 pages I was kind of like, maybe I don't want to read this, like maybe I don't want to finish it. I don't really know, but I hate to put down books. Like I will finish like the worst book even if I'm not into it, just because I always hold out hope that I will get something out of it in the end. And I think this was definitely one that like really snuck up on me. In the last like 30 or so pages, I cried so much reading this. And I think part of that was PMS. Like it was just, I was very hormonal. Not to say that it's not emotional, because it definitely is, but it basically follows a family and their kind of family history, and then also all the relationships between the brothers and their father who leaves, and then the father kind of comes back, and Clay, who is one of the brothers, goes to build a bridge with him, and bridges kind of have a lot of like symbolism in the text, and so it's kind of like Clay is like building a bridge, but he's also kind of the bridge himself in a lot of ways. But yeah, ultimately I really love this, but as I said, it really snuck up on me, and I think it definitely takes some getting into, but I would recommend it if anybody's looking for a longer read, and I thought it was really great. The next book is The Giver by Lois Lowry. I read a fair amount of like young adult literature this month. I don't know what that was about, but I saw this this was actually in a pile of books that I was planning on getting rid of, and then I was looking at this and I was like, have I actually read this? Because I don't think I have. Like, I remember seeing it around when I was much younger. Like when I was in elementary school, I remember we had copies in the classroom, and I remember also like other Lois Lowry books, like I remember seeing Number the Stars around. But they're books that like I'm not sure if I read them or if I just have a really strong memory of like seeing the covers, and like that's imprinted in my brain in such a way that I think I read it even though maybe I haven't. So yeah, I don't know if I've read this before, but I really liked it. I read it in one night. It was super fast. I think I read it in like 2.5 hours, and it's definitely something that you can read fast, especially if you're a more experienced reader. I feel like the reading level is like probably like middle grade. I'm really bad at gauging that. But yeah, I actually really liked this. I think it was something that was really nice to read like in this time during the pandemic, especially since it's about, you know, a world that is very different from our own, and like a society that is very different from our own in a lot of ways, but the themes that it talks about, and the importance of kind of sharing the burden of pain, and like who has access to knowledge, and the great and terrible responsibility that comes with knowing what has happened in the past, and trying to make a place where everybody can be taken care of and feel loved without being totally shielded from the more horrific parts of the world. I thought that whole discussion was super interesting. It has a very ambiguous ending, and I kind of like that, actually. I like that we don't really know where it goes, and we kind of have to decide for ourselves. I also was unaware previously that there are 3 other books that are written kind of they're not necessarily a series, but they go together. Gathering Blue, Messenger, and Sun are also by her and also have the same cast of characters, and I guess they are all, you don't really have to read the others because they don't really continue this storyline, but they center on other characters in the world. I forgot to say Jonas is the main character. I did not mention that at all. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I would definitely recommend it. Super fast, and yeah, I think quite kind of touching too. So okay, the next book I read was actually a reread for me. It's An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I was really glad to discover that when I read it for a second time, like I found that it really stood up, for me at least, and it's really fast paced. It's definitely one that makes you want to keep reading it. I read this in like a couple days. I read this originally when it came out, like just when it was released, which I believe was 2018. At the time it was released, I read it in like a day, and I really liked it. I just reread it this past month because one of my Christmas gifts was A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, which is the sequel. And I wanted to kind of refamiliarize myself with the characters and where we had left off. I definitely remembered some of the story, but I had kind of forgotten some of the finer points, and I wanted to kind of refamiliarize myself. So I went back and read this one first, and I actually really enjoyed it. I think these two together, like, I think they speak so well to the current times we're living in, both in terms of the influence of technology, the political situation, social media, fame, kind of like YouTube and digital platforms, and also like issues of kind of political polemicism and polarity. I think these speak to those issues in a really great way, for my money, and I think that, yeah, I definitely recommend them to everyone. I was expecting this one to be like a little bit of a letdown. I think it was slightly slower paced initially, but I think it really picks up like about 200 pages in, and I might like this better than the first one. I'm not super sure. I'm still kind of mulling it over in my mind, but I love both of these, and I think they're great, and I think they talk about a lot of really important issues. While these are YA books, I think they could be important for adults to read as well. I definitely really enjoy the humor, the queer representation. The writing is, I think, really easy to get into, and the plot really moves at like a really nice rate. So yeah, I would recommend both of these, and I think they're both wonderful books. So the next one is the book I finished during my reading vlog, and that is Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. I believe this was published in 1976. Nope. I'm so terrible with dates. It was published originally in 1958. And it is set in a Nigerian village. And I don't know, I had a lot of issues with this one. I found this one really like hard to get into, and also I felt like, especially after reading the Hank Green books, the plot, like it felt like nothing happened. It felt like it was structured as follows: event, 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 but kind of the line of the narrative, or like the arc or lack thereof of the narrative, I felt like it was just so flat. And I felt like I really didn't, I don't know, like I didn't get that much out of it. I think it talks about a lot of really important things. I found it really interesting to learn about like Igbo culture and a lot of those aspects of the novel, but the writing was really unexciting for me, and I think again the lack of arc and the lack of development for me was difficult to get through. I do think it talks about important things. It does talk about colonization from an interesting perspective. I need to do more reading about like the critical reception of this text, because I think it's very important like in a literary way. Clearly if it's been released again and again, that tells you something about the demand for the book. But yeah, I would be curious to read more about this one, just because I didn't feel like I got that much out of it. I didn't really feel attached to the characters, and I would like to hear more about maybe why I should care about it and what makes it important. So yeah. The next one is Little Constructions by Anna Burns. And this one was admittedly difficult. I think if you've read anything by Burns, you know that her writing can be dense and difficult. But I think for me, that's what makes it really exciting and challenging. There's an ongoing discussion definitely on like difficult books and what's the purpose of experimental literature and things like that. That's something I actually talked a lot about in my senior thesis, because I actually wrote on another novel because I actually wrote on another novel by Burns called Milkman, which won the Man Booker Prize, which is now just the Booker Prize, in 2018. So I was like kind of familiar with her style, and I spent a lot of time looking at, you know, experimental literature and thinking about its purpose, its strengths, its weaknesses, all that kind of thing. So I was excited to read something else by her, because I read Milkman for the first time a few years ago as part of a class, and then I came back to it for my thesis, and I read it again, and my copy of Milkman is like totally marked up, and the pens I was using kept running out of ink, so there are like 5 colors of ink throughout the book. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and clearly because I wrote my thesis on it. But this was written before Milkman, I want to say. I think it's her second novel, whereas Milkman is her third. I think that's right, but if I'm wrong, you'll see something on the screen now. So yeah, this is about a family in the town of Tiptoe Floorboard, which this one, I like don't even know how to describe this. I would definitely want to go back for a second read and see if I can get more out of it and tease more like out of it in terms of what I understand and what I take away. I think because this whole family has the same initials, basically, they're the Doe family, and there's like Jane Doe, Jetty Doe, John Doe, Janine Joshuatine Doe, Judas Doe, like there are so many J names, and I think that's done very intentionally. In Milkman, there are no names. People are just identified by their relationship to one another, so like third brother-in-law, first brother-in-law, middle sister, longest friend, etc. I think she does a lot with names that's really interesting. I think if I went back and read this again, I would want to do like a family tree, like you know how some editions of Shakespeare plays will start with like a family tree on the first page that you can go back to and reference. So you like if you forget like who's related to whom and who is in what family, you can kind of have a little bit of a cheat sheet. I feel like I would go back and make one for this book because I think that would help a lot. There are also 2 toms, and yeah, it's really confusing. That said, I think this deals with a lot of really important topics. A lot of it talks about rape, about misogyny, about trauma, and at the same time, there's like so much humor and there's so much like kind of tongue-in-cheek wit. And I love that about her writing. In addition, she also weaves in these elements of kind of like the spiritual and the occult and kind of like ghostly presences, if that makes sense. She's also constantly toying with, what is reality? The narrator will tell you something and then you'll find out like 50 pages later that that wasn't even what actually happened. The reliability of the narrator is definitely in question in this one. Well, I finished it and didn't necessarily understand everything by the time I got to the end of it. I think I would definitely want to read it again. I definitely still enjoyed it and got something out of it. And I would love to hear what others who have read this think, so yeah. So the last book is not this whole thing. It is The Magician's Nephew, which is contained within this. I just like hit myself in the face. Oops. The Magician's Nephew is actually not the first book technically in the Chronicles of Narnia. It is a prequel, so it was published later, but it deals with things that happened before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all of the rest of the books. This is super short. It's like 106 pages. I could have read it in one sitting, but stretched it out because I think I did a lot more reading towards the beginning of the month, and then my actual paying job that I have picked up a lot in the second half of January, so I wasn't able to read as much as I would have liked. And at that point, I kind of pulled back and was not reading as much. So the vast majority of what I've just shown you was towards the beginning or middle of January. In the last couple of days, I read The Magician's Nephew. This edition has all of the Chronicles of Narnia in like one volume, which is why it's giant. I enjoyed it. The reading level is definitely quite low if you're a college student or even if you're in high school, I think. Like it's definitely fully written for children. There's also a lot of interesting kind of biblical allegory. I think if I read this when I was younger, and this is another one which, like The Giver, I'm not sure if I actually read it. I know that I saw the movies and was like very excited when they came out in the theater. I remember seeing them in the theater with my mom and my sister, but I don't actually know if I've read these before. I feel like I would have at least read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I don't know if I read all of them. So for all intents and purposes, this was my first time reading The Magician's Nephew, or I just completely spaced, but either way, it felt like it was my first time reading it. You kind of see the making of Narnia, which is really interesting. I think there's a lot of kind of beautiful language in here, and it's definitely like a good cozy one for like a snow day, very escapist, definitely gets you out of your immediate environment and into this whole other world. So yeah, I've now just started The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I'm planning on finishing this whole thing. I wasn't sure whether to count this or include it because it is its own book, but it's also within this book, so yeah, that was confusing for me. Yeah, I really liked it a lot. Okay, so that is everything I read this month. That is my January wrap-up complete. I hope you enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed a lot of what I read this month. If you'd like to, in a comment below, please feel free to let me know what you read this month or what your favorite book was that you read this month, or if you just have reading recommendations outside of that, I'm always happy to hear those. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. My foot is asleep. My foot is asleep. Apologies if my nose was running for that. That's kind of gross.